am told that countering weapons of mass destruction is important to the US. I don't know if that's accurate or not. I am told that medical products that would protect people from weapons of mass destruction is important. So why am I failing in my mission to develop those medical products? So when IL said that, I said, yes, I'll be there. I actually didn't even know what a non-dilutive funding summit, what it actually meant. But when I looked into it, I thought, yeah, let me come on out here, and I'm going to present my perspective, and I'm looking for feedback. And I'm going to lay out my challenge, and I'm going to lay out my business, hopefully in a way that makes sense to all of you. And I'm going to share some of my frustrations, because when you get right to the bottom of it, market forces drive this world. And I've got some challenges there. And so I welcome the feedback that any and all of you may be able to share from where you all sit that could possibly help me with my mission success. And how much time do we have for this? Because I don't intend to talk for 45 minutes, but just... Okie doke. So that's my world. I'm in the military, obviously, judging by the uniform, and we are concerned about things like chemical weapons being used against us, biological weapons, the nuclear. If you look at the last couple of years, there have been a large bio event, not weaponized, but the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Who would have predicted an event of that magnitude? In 1995, I went into Zaire to be part of a WHO team responding to what at that time was one of the largest Ebola outbreaks, and it was about 300 cases. So 15,000, or actually closer to 30,000 cases, and you look at the mobilization of many elements within the world to respond. So kind of a huge event. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with the Syria chemical weapon arsenal. That was a pretty hot issue for the military as we were thinking, are we going to be more actively involved in Syria, and what are the risks that we take to our troops? And then you had the nuclear disaster in Japan. Who would have anticipated that? So these events can pop up out of nowhere, and my challenge is that we're supposed to be prepared, but these threats are unpredictable. What's going to happen next? When? Where? What will the magnitude be? And oh, I'm supposed to be prepared for a whole myriad of these. How many of you in the community actually work with medical products in some way, shape, or form? So many of you. So you understand the costs associated with developing a medical product. I mean, I don't know what the latest estimates are. Well, is it $1 billion? Is it $2 billion? I don't know. It's a lot of money. And so I'll get into that a little bit more here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the group that I work for, who we are, what we do. And many of you may be disappointed because you may be coming to me looking for the opportunities that my group could afford working with your company. And in most cases, I'm not the group you want to work with. That being said, I likely can put you in touch with the appropriate entities within the US military that may be interested in talking with you. So this is the world that I live in. It's complicated. The US military, a couple million people, primary mission, defend the interests of the nation. But at some point within there, we all have our niche areas. And this is my world, the chemical and biological defense portfolio, program, enterprise. Complicated. I won't bore you with all of this, but as an outsider looking in, frequently what you're concerned about is, where the heck is my touch point? How do I gain entry into this? I'm buried down here. The Joint Program Executive Office for Chemical and Biological Defense has a number of project managers, each responsible for a portion of the enterprise. And so I'm the advanced developer for all things medical, for all things CERBURNI, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear. And so that's my arena. Now you may want to ask, well, how do I figure out what I'm going to work on? And so we are not an S&T organization. Everything we do has a very, very applied purpose. And so what I do is I work off of validated requirements. So the military, the services, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, they look at what they think their most important threats are, and they look at the gaps that exist. So if you look at the recent, the conflict in Iraq and Afghan, soldiers were getting blown up in remote locations, and they needed blood products that could be used in remote locations where there wasn't going to be a reliable electrical source, there wasn't going to be a freezer source. And so, an example, freeze-dried plasma was something that was urgently required to save lives in the battlefield. So there is a process whereby the military determines what the requirements are, what the gaps are, and what is needed to overcome those gaps. So that's a fundamental key from my world, is you got to have a validated requirement. Above and beyond that, though, you have to have a technology that could meet that requirement. In some cases, those technologies don't exist, so I would not be working on them. Now, we do have enterprises like DARPA that works on really cutting-edge, next-generation type stuff. I'm an advanced developer, so I work on fairly mature technologies, so stuff that really has been through a phase 1 clinical trial, maybe even a phase 2. My job is to push it over the finish line, have an FDA-approved product that will meet those requirements. However, we have a whole science and technology community whose job essentially is to fund research that ultimately would yield a technology that could transition to my group. So if you're in a company that has fairly early technology that might be able to meet some of my capabilities, I'm happy to help figure out where within that enterprise that I showed you before would be a good entry point and help make those connections. So in my world then, I'm down here at the bottom where I've got to take mature technology and have a requirement, and we've got to have some dollars, and we ideally would spit out an FDA-approved product at the end. So I'll give you a quick rundown here of, this is what my organization looks like. We've got about 180 different people working on this fairly broad array of products. I've got a budget of about $400 million a year, which may sound significant if you're in a small company, but if you then look at my portfolio of products, you may wonder, how the heck can they do that, or why would they even try some cases? But if you look on the, kind of in the middle there, my bread and butter is these joint product managers, and they each run or manage a portfolio of efforts. So on the left there, a vaccine acquisition program. Next to that, a diagnostics program. Next to that, chemical defense, pharmaceuticals, and then biological defense therapeutics. So, okay, so that's sort of what is our vision. So I talked a little bit about my opening slide there. The ability to provide the medical support so that if the US military gets into an arena where chemical or biological or nuclear weapons may be used, we could survive and still win the battle. Our focus is really across the board. Ideally, we would prevent the threat from affecting our military members. If we can't do that, though, and there is some effect, we've got to be able to diagnose this, and then we want to be able to treat it. Here is what my current portfolio looks like. And so if you look on the left side, that's the broad spectrum, the capability areas, the prevention, diagnosis, and therapeutics. And within each of those, we've got products that we are working on. So again, these are mature technologies. We currently have partners in each of these areas, so there's probably little chance of new efforts to come in and actively work with me here and now. I have a defined budget, and I really can't get into more and different things until either we decide these are going to be unsuccessful when we kill an effort, or we get something over the finish line. And so this is just to share what the efforts that we have currently look like. We do have a number of products that we have fielded, and if you look there, anthrax and smallpox up top, the vaccines. And a lot of these have been done in partnership with our colleagues in Health and Human Services. And my mission is specifically to support the U.S. military, where Health and Human Services is supporting the homeland. And the reason anthrax and smallpox, we do have products in large part, is that Health and Human Service, they require large quantities. So we're talking typically hundreds of millions of doses. For the military, for our unique things, we're talking a couple 100,000 doses, and so a much smaller market. So the successes that we see, certainly the anthrax and smallpox, the market forces are such that for those products, there is some money to be made off of those. For some of these more niche products, going back here, for example, that bottom vaccine there, WEV, Western, Eastern, and Venezuelan encephalitis vaccine. How many of you are even familiar with the alpha viruses? Okay, I saw a couple hands go up, but there is essentially a minuscule market there. It's not going to be a profitable product, but if we were hit by an adversary using that, where we could have potentially 20, 30,000 casualties, that would be a huge impact on the military. So again, we've got products fielded. We've got products we're working on. I get back to my opening comment as to, I feel like I'm failing in my mission because of the challenges that I face. And I want to talk about these, and I want to hopefully lead this into a conversation. I've highlighted the unpredictability of the threat. So we've got products that we need, but they're products that we hope will never be used. They're products, if they were used, would be probably for a relatively small market. Which ones would be used when and where, we don't know. So we probably have a small numbers requirement, which probably is not a huge incentive to most of you. But oh yes, we want to be able to surge should the occasion arise, which right there is problematic. So that's my fundamental starting point. There's no return on investment. I mentioned already, and you're all familiar with this, medical product development. How many candidates go into the hopper to spit out that single product at the end? And what are the failure rates going along? I'm sure all of you who raised a hand about developing medical products, you've been to the pharma conferences where really what you have is small biotech wooing large pharma. And large pharma wanted to see that the risk has been mitigated so that they can make a meaningful investment that will actually yield something that gets to licensure and is going to satisfy their stockholders. That's the basic formula there. Now, we get lots of companies that want to come work with us on a technology that may meet our aims. But these small companies typically don't have the horsepower to get the product over the finish line. And in the normal market forces, these small companies would either sink or swim. They'd swim if their technology was such that large pharma saw the value and they could attract the dollars to get it over the finish line. And failing that, they likely would be out of business. It's risky, we all know that. And so when companies come to me and they're interested in seeing if their technology matches our needs, yes, we can provide dollars, but I've got to be thinking about, will I be able to get this over the finish line? And if so, will that product be around for years to come so when needed, it's there? So that's challenging because lots of times you're not looking for the same solution set that I am. You're probably going after a commercially viable market, which obviously makes sense to you and your investors, whereas mine is fundamentally different. And so how do you come up with a win-win? A scenario could be that, well, we partner and I help you move your technology forward in a way that would get you to a commercially viable product, but one that may meet my needs as well. And so I've got to think long and hard about those partnerships that would yield that win-win. What doesn't work is us entering into a partnership where you may notionally say you're interested in my alpha virus vaccine, but you're really going for something fundamentally different, and that would not be a good investment of my dollars. So as you think about partnering with the military, keep those sorts of things in mind. So I'm not trying to intimidate. but I am trying to highlight from where I sit some of the challenges that I see. Now, when you look at the list of threat agents that I'm interested in, so from the previous slide, ricin, tularemia, alpha viruses, Ebola virus, these are not products that have a large patient population sitting in a hospital here in the US amenable to testing. Ethically, you can't do it. You got a disease like Ebola that's 50% fatal in a couple of weeks. Obviously can't do it. And the patient population doesn't exist. So the FDA has something called the animal rule. That is where we do most of our work. Now, when people hear animal rule, and I'm sure most of you are at least fundamentally familiar with the concept, many outsiders would say, oh, well, that's obviously a much easier pathway to licensure. Well, that just ain't so. We still have to show efficacy in humans, but above and beyond that, we've got to demonstrate efficacy in at least 2 animal models that are in some way predictive of human health. And so to develop an animal model where the FDA has confidence that the results that we're seeing truly are predictive of what would happen in humans is incredibly challenging. So now you overlay, we've got a no return on investment, we don't have a patient population, we got these challenges of just getting the data to satisfy the FDA, and it starts to look even more daunting. So that's a hospital somewhere in the developed world where the military went and set up, and it's not quite the same as a large facility here in the US. So we have our own unique challenges working in that operational situation. And above and beyond that, where might we be? What part of the world? Yes, we may have some vaccine that we've got to get somewhere, some special forces, not a vaccine, but let's say a therapeutic, some special forces soldiers in a remote situation where there is no freezer refrigeration capability, and that box that's going to come off that helicopter is going to be sitting in 120-degree temperatures. So now you lay those additional challenges in the products we're looking for. Yeah, we want it lyophilized, let's say. Well, that could be daunting. And I've talked about this to some degree already, that return on investment. As a result of the Ebola outbreak, what I saw was companies electing to jump into the fray, to say we recognize that this is an international humanitarian crisis and we, a pharmaceutical company, could provide some capability. And the companies, at great expense and at great cost and at great disruption, have elected to jump in. And that's wonderful. I've spent a lot of my time post-Ebola outbreak going around talking to some of the large pharmaceutical companies about their willingness, but also about their failure. I don't know of any case, whether it be SARS or MERS-CoV or Ebola virus, where on an emergency basis you can disrupt things you're working on, jump into this endeavor, and deliver something in a timely manner where it actually makes a difference. Notionally, it's great, and we are incredibly interested in the idea of a platform technology, something truly agile and flexible, where the FDA would have confidence in the safety of a platform that could be used for different indications if and when needed. But I don't know that that's really been a validated concept, and what are the time frames that we're talking about where you could pivot and deliver a capability. In the military, it might be in the order of a couple of weeks that we would need something like that. So it's easy to forget that the FDA likely is going to need some evidence above and beyond what you've demonstrated early on. So it's challenging. So you layer all these things together, and why would any sane company choose to work in this arena? And it's a thorny problem. From a strategic national perspective, it's a huge issue. And God forbid something were to be used, whether on our military or on our nation, where we would see tens of thousands of casualties. But that doesn't really satisfy stockholders, does it? So what are solution sets that would encourage the right companies to enter into this space? And when I say the right companies, I don't mean to demean anyone along the spectrum from biotech startups right up to large pharma. So is there a sweet spot in terms of technology that can get over the finish line to meet these needs? I don't know, but that's one of the things that I'm seeking. Small technology, the model doesn't fit our model. You're going to need some horsepower to do those phase 3 clinical trials, and normally a biotech's either going to have to get bought up or have some creative partnerships with CROs, CMOs, and so forth to get them over the finish line. In our niche, I'm not sure that is going to work like that. So one of the things that I look at is, I've been with my organization for 3 years, and this is what the military does. They bring someone in, they put them there for 3 years, and then they bring someone else in. So what can be accomplished in that span? And what I would say is, typically we come in and we approach the challenges from a very tactical perspective. What can I do that's within my power to control? And so I've been doing those sorts of things, obviously. Bringing in expert consultants. Hey, come look at my business model. Come look at the things that we're working on. Does this make sense? Do I have the right expertise? So when we have our commercial partners who maybe don't have a whole lot of experience, when they're making decisions on manufacturing scale-up, are they missing something critical? So I can control a lot of these things. How many of you have actually worked with the US government on a contractual basis? So several hands come up. Were those FAR-based contracts? Does everyone know? Federal acquisition regulations, so some heads are going up and down. Everyone may not know what it means, but for those of you who did, was it fun? No. So the FAR-based contractual regulations are burdensome, they're onerous, they're incredibly challenging. They may make sense for the standard military defense industrial complex. So if you're going to be building, 100 fighter planes for the cost of $1 trillion, they work. But if you're developing some pretty unique niche medical products, there's absolutely no value. And so in the introduction, they mentioned this idea of an OTA consortium. And an OTA is an other transaction authority. It's not FAR-based, and it gives us incredible flexibility to work with our partners. So we are in the process of standing up an OTA consortium. It should be announced within the next 1 to 2 months. And this is going to be a company that brings together partners who could work with us separate from FAR-based contracts. And the idea would be, I could go to the consortium and say, we need some work done in this area. And they would solicit from their members white papers, 1 or 2 pages, explaining the capability that you could bring to bear. Not the standard 100 or 200 page proposal that you would normally have to submit at incredible cost to respond to an RFP. And once we saw those white papers, we could say, yeah, we really like this one, but it's got some weaknesses. And we could then work with the company to overcome those weaknesses. So if you didn't have a good plan for clinical trials, we could make sure that we're going to address that before we decided to partner with you. And so this OTA gives us not only an easy way to work with our partners, but an easy way to shape those partnerships so we're set up for success from the beginning. I cannot tell you how many times I've submitted requests for proposals and I see 10 proposals come in, none of them which really meet my needs, but I'm forced to pick the best of the worst. And that's not a recipe for success for myself, nor for that company that we're entering into an agreement with. Because you want to get your technology advanced and matured to a point where you've got a commercially viable product that's meeting your needs. So again, these are things within my power that I am shaping. You may have heard about our Advanced Developing and Manufacturing Consortium. We've got a contract with a company down in Florida that's got the ability to do small-scale manufacturing on our unique niche products so that if you, a company, have a capability that we could work with you to develop, we potentially got a place to do that manufacturing, and that may be attractive to some of you. Here's, though, where I get into the arena that is outside my control. And so market forces drive this business. There is no return on investment at the moment to be made from working with me on those unique medical products that counter weapons of mass destruction. So what has to change? Yes, I've done the things that I can do, but I tell my team we're failing on our mission, and they're aghast. Oh, you're telling me that we're doing a terrible job? No, you're doing a fabulous job within the constraints of what you can do. But you're still beating your head on a wall till it's bloody, and it's not helping us getting a product over the finish line. So what would have to change? How many of you are familiar with the concept of the FDA priority review vouchers? So I see a couple of hands go up. So there are two laws that have been enacted. One is for tropical diseases, and one is for rare pediatric diseases. And so if you, a commercial company, take a new chemical entity to licensure, either under a BLA or an NDA, for a threat that's on either a rare pediatric disease or on this list of tropical diseases, you get a voucher for priority review by the FDA. And that voucher can be transferred. And that voucher has tangible value. You know, you can sell that to a large pharma that has the next big blockbuster on the horizon. And that's worth something to that company because that gives them a 6-month review versus the 9, 10, 12, 14, or longer reviews that typically take place. That's additional revenue to that company. That's additional period of patent protection. And so, to date, 4 priority review vouchers have sold. The first one for $67 million, I believe, and the most recent for $350 million. So that's an incentive. So if you choose to work on those rare tropical diseases, you get something to licensure, right there is something that you can share with your company, your investors, etc. So that's going to drive, we hope, some of the market to work in this arena. Unfortunately, the current priority review vouchers don't apply to the chemical and biological threats that face our nation. There are, at the moment, there's a separate House and Senate bill being worked that could bring this provision to bear. And so there may be vouchers that would encourage groups to work in this arena. Now, I've gone out and talked to large pharma, and they almost scoff at the idea of something like a priority review voucher being enough to incentivize them to get into an arena where there's still no return on investment other than that immediate. I mean, they're looking for the billions of dollars return, maybe on an annual basis, not a one-time couple $100 million return. So when I say I'm looking for the sweet spot when it comes to partnerships, you know, I'm not sure, is my partner large pharma? Is it small biotech that we could work with? Is it a mid-sized pharma? I'm not really sure, but I'm hoping there's somehow a sweet spot where there's a foreseeable win out there that would make sense both to the government and for our commercial partners. Now, when I talk to large pharma, and I spent some time earlier this week chatting about this very topic, and they listed out on the one side, you know, a zero balance sheet and the cost of development, you know, being way down there, and these different incentives that could, get up to a zero value point, but then to a profitable return. It's going to take a lot more than this, and there's things like market exclusivity, possibly a transferable voucher program that would give patent extension or patent protection to some degree. And the one company I talked with, they indicated that for them to seriously get into the game, they would require about a 2-year patent extension on a billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar product to even consider getting into the game on these neglected type products that we're talking about. Tax credits, I mentioned the animal rule. So if you work on medical research, yes, you get tax credits for clinical aspects of development, but for me, non-clinical is equally important. Nothing exists in that arena. So again, the odds are stacked against me. And what I would ask is, if you have time to put a little of intellect into this, from where you all sit, what are incentives that would drive you? I'd be keenly interested in hearing that. And obviously, a lot of these things, it's going to take legislation to make it happen. In the DoD, that's not our strong suit. We really focus on, we've got a mission to accomplish. Nevertheless, there are ways that we can engage to have discussions with our legislator to talk about the importance of these things, and these are on the radar in certain arenas. But every time I can talk, for example, about a transferable patent extension program, you can bet that for every person like myself thinking that this is important, there are probably 100 people thinking this is a bad idea. Because what's that going to result in? It's going to result in higher prices on some other product for whatever that defined period may be. And so who are the ones who can make that decision as to what is important enough to enact the legislation? So it's an interesting dilemma that I certainly have. So you may not know, the military has chosen to break, for example, biological threats into two arenas. There are those that have been weaponized, and we have separate legislation applying to those and separate pots of money. And then there's the naturally occurring diseases that threaten our military when we go overseas. And so in both of those arenas, we have threats because while for something like dengue fever, which is a virus that affects hundreds of millions of people, that unfortunately affect the population of the world that is not in a position to pay, $50, $100, a couple $100 for a vaccine, maybe they could afford $1 or $2. And so the dilemma is really across the whole spectrum of threats that the military may face, not just in weapons of mass destruction. That is my arena. And again, I've asked, would welcome hearing what ideas might be, what market forces drive you from your foxhole, your window into the world. We'd be interested in hearing more. And so obviously there's a lot that's going to have to come together before I'm able to start getting products across the finish line in a realistic time frame. The cost of $1 billion, the time frame of 10 or 15 years to get a product across the finish line. When's that next disaster going to affect the military or going to affect our nation? If it's next year and I don't have a product, well, it may be nice that we've got something on the horizon, but it doesn't help us in the middle of that emergency. So I've pretty much said what I wanted to say here. I don't know if I said it eloquently or not, but I hope I've imparted to you, the significance of the threat, the challenges that we face, the dilemma that I'm in, and my interest in hearing what might be some creative ways to overcome some of this. I know Dr. Mike Kurilla from the NIH will be talking to you some more, and I know Mike's in the same position that I am. We welcome the opportunity to chat with you. I'm going to quickly go back to the very first slide. There's probably an easier way to do this, but for some of you who have an interest in how to work with the DoD, I may not be your best partner as I've described our mission. You may have an early technology, but what I can do is if you reach out to me, and I'd love to talk with you during this meeting, but if you can describe to me your interest, I can probably put you in touch with a group that could work with you. So if you've got something, someone talked to me earlier about hearing challenges. Well, I know some of the audiologists in the Army who are funding research. I can put you in touch with those. If you're working on traumatic brain injury and you have some early science effort, I can put you in touch with the right entity that would talk with you. That's obviously no guarantee that they will work with you or that they will have funding to provide, but in most cases, we're really very open to having those discussions with folks who may have a technology that could meet our need. So on that, I will end. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I'm glad I have figured out what a non-dilutive funding summit is, and I hope this has been of some interest to all of you. Thanks very much. So looking at the schedule, I believe there's still time for questions. Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask, you said something about rare children's disease. That seems to be other in the spectrum.
So that is a program that is in place. It has really no value to the military per se, But because of the difficulty of getting products approved for some very rare pediatric diseases, our legislative body implemented this regulation. So, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there is a program in place whereby if you submit a NDA or a BLA for a rare pediatric disease, you will get a transferable voucher that you can then sell. And so that is hopefully incentivizing companies to work on those sorts of products. That is of no interest to the military, so that's not a program that the military in any way helped to shape. Now, the tropical disease priority voucher program is of interest to the military as a result of where we go, and I don't know that we helped shape it, but I would guess that our fingerprints are on it, as are Health and Human Services. Did that make sense?
As much as possible.
Can't help you there. Were there other questions?
Would you say a word about companies that have platform technologies to improve the kinds of vaccines? You talked about already fielded vaccines and ones that come from the pipeline, and you discussed these are probably not good ones to start at your small company. But if we are a company that could thermostabilize the vaccines so that they could be stable and warm temperatures, or they could
absolutely
be reconstituted either by thermal or by nasal or by pill, so that in the field you don't have.
Right, so here I'll give you an example. Anthrax vaccine. I think it was originally approved. Mike, are you in the audience? Mike Kurla? Not here? Not here yet. So I think it was originally approved as a 6 series shot. That took, I believe, a year before you had protection. Well, that's troubling for anyone, but the military, where we may be asked tomorrow to go, and if you don't have people fully vaccinated, that's not ideal. We love a vaccine that within immediate you'd have protection. Well, that's not realistic, but what about a 28-day vaccine like you have from some of these? So can we go from a year down to a month? That would be lovely. Can you go from a series of 5 or 6 vaccines to 2? Well, we know it works for some vaccines. Well, recombinant vaccines, okay, it's going to be a little difficult there. So are there adjuvants that would help this? Do you then get to the whole issue of where and how and when we need products? The freeze-dried aspects, probably for vaccines, are not necessarily an issue. We tend to vaccinate our forces here in the US before they go anywhere. Less of an issue. But for something like a therapeutic product or a diagnostic product that would be used in remote parts of the world, yes, that would be relevant. Did that get to your question? And
then the other piece, you talked about what would incentivize small companies or technologies. In our case, what I didn't see on your list was Ebola, and our answer to how do we get into this. I guess there's 1 or 2 Ebola vaccines that have been approved, but they're in late phases. We're piggybacking onto one that's in phase 2 clinical trials to do our technology, which is we'll get into it. But while the main vaccine that's not stable, maybe multiple injections within phase 2 clinical trials, we're piggybacking through the research now to take that same vaccine and make it thermostable, and see if the company will accept it. What the companies tell us is they sell a lot more.
So they like that aspect. Right. So on our list, it was filovirus vaccines and filovirus therapeutics. So actually, the U.S. government has had a huge role in Ebola, both on the NIH side, BARDA side, and the DoD side. The successes that came, everyone laments the fact that, we didn't have products in place to treat Ebola. But the reality is, a result of 10 to 15 years of work, we had a lot of stuff pretty close. So we had diagnostic assays that we had pre-positioned with the FDA, so we had pre-EUA packets. So within 30 days of the outbreak, we had approval to use those under EUA. Those were provided to the CDC, and those were used to diagnose every single patient in this country. They were used in West Africa as well. You heard about drugs being put into patients. While they were not FDA approved, they were used under FDA-approved mechanisms. So let's say an emergency treatment IND. And so the FDA had enough confidence as they weighed the risk-benefit that these drugs could provide some value. So I know NIH had a portfolio of products. We had a portfolio of products. None of them are across the finish line at the moment, but we're pretty well positioned. And now as a result of the outbreak, where there seems to be significant interest on a number of companies, so we're working with probably 5 different Ebola virus vaccines with various partners. Hopefully something will get over the finish line. Now my concern is, while there's this surge of interest, let's say in Ebola, will that diminish as time goes by, as companies have to report to their boards of investors and so forth, board of directors, investors, and stakeholders? Well, yeah, that Ebola outbreak happened. We'll never see another one like it. Why are you still working on that? There's better returns elsewhere. Hope that answered the question. I see 2 hands back there. The gentleman on my right. Yes, the white-haired one like I am.
I wonder if you would be in a position to comment on government action plan in regard to antibiotic resistance. What is your
So yes, there is great interest on the part of the government on combating antimicrobial resistance. I have not been closely involved in those discussions, nor am I privy to, at the highest levels, what that plan and strategy is. I know that NIH is actively engaged, the US military is actively engaged, BARDA is engaged. We have some efforts ongoing. We call it Commander B. Sounds good for the military, countering multi-drug resistant bacteria. Got an interest there. Now, of course, from a commercial perspective, are these products that will be held in reserve and stockpiled? And in that case, what's the profit margin there? As we all know, antibiotic, the market has dried up. I mean, there's not a whole lot of people investing there, but the challenges emerge. When I hear those scenarios, I mean, I get pretty excited because I think there are some win-wins out there where if there's true products that work against an array, broad spectrum type products that would be commercially viable, and we could perhaps just get data that showed they would work against, let's say, drug-resistant plague. Maybe we just do some studies and physicians can use them off-label. I think there are opportunities out there that we would love to use our dollars to assist in furthering those efforts, with the understanding that our needs ultimately have to be met, but that there's no reason our needs wouldn't be compatible perhaps with commercial companies. Sir?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could comment on some of the different ways you're thinking about OTA in EEO, whether it's more kind of like you did with AstraZeneca and NIAID, or it's just going to be the big consortium, or the consortium will identify companies, and the companies can kind of act as their own general contractor, or there's going to be a lot of flexibility and you're still kind of feeling your way through what can be the most effective.
Right. So when it comes to OTAs, there are, bilateral OTAs, a government commercial company partnership. We have the ability to do that. So we have a broad agency announcement that we just revised that it now allows for OTAs. So we can enter into those one-to-one relationships. With the consortium, we're hiring a management company that is establishing really a group of the willing. There are a number of companies that likely will be part of that consortium, but there's also going to be a low bar to entry. And so we envision there being tremendous flexibility. So let's say I'm at this meeting and someone comes up and has this really neat idea that we would love to work with. I would say, the best way to proceed with us is to go reach out to this consortium, become a member. Now, I don't know the specifics because the agreement is not in place yet, but let's say there's a $500 bar to entry. Pay $500, you're now a member of the consortium. At that point, I would reach out with the request to the consortium management company saying, we're interested in this sort of work. We'd like to see some white papers. Your company is now a member of the consortium. You'd be asked, you'd provide it. So essentially, we've set that up where we could engage with you. We have an opportunity then to look at those white papers and decide, what's our interest level? Is it a good partnership where we're willing to invest dollars? Or maybe it's something we just put on the side. With typical FAR contracting, it's a one-time deal. You put out your solicitation, you get proposals, and you make a decision. If you don't fund, they're gone. With these white papers, we could just sit them there, and if either interest emerges where, let's say, there's been an actual alpha virus outbreak or something else, we could then jump on that. So we're still exploring all the details, and please don't quote me on anything, but I think the flexibility that this offers is what intrigues me the most.
So I've got this listed by 3 or 4 of the sorts of management companies. So you probably would decide on whichever one of them is the best one, or could be that you have a couple of those.
I can't comment on that because we're in the midst of putting that contract, that agreement in place. Our goal is to have at least one company managing a consortium. And again, if you're a company and you're not on a list already, it doesn't matter. You can join. You can join tomorrow. You can join 5 years from now if we suddenly have an interest in doing this. For those of you who don't know how we work, I'm an advanced developer, but I have S&T partners within the U.S. military, and they'll be participating in this as well. And so there's opportunities to do early type new technology or the mature technologies that I'm looking for. Did that get to the heart of the question? In the back.
So you're the advanced developer, and then beyond you for the end users or final product purchasers. Are there, you say a bit about who those might be, and are there types of technologies that you can use to establish a little bit of potential continuity on who's both?
Yeah, so that is an area of uncertainty at times that do concern potential partners. So we normally will fund the development to FDA approval, and then we field using our dollars to what we call full operational capability. So if we have a requirement for 1 million doses of vaccine a year, we will use our dollars and pay for that first $1 million of doses. After that, it's on the services, so the Army, the Navy, they've got to figure out what their needs are, they've got to set their dollars aside, and they've got to purchase the vaccine. And so that can be an area of concern, and historically, we have had trouble getting those people to evaluate their needs early. They'll say, well, give us an FDA-approved product, and then we'll figure out what our needs may be. Well, that's not real reassuring. So recently, we've had some success bringing those groups together saying, you know, we're 6 or 7 years off from where we think we'll have an FDA-approved product. We need to start having these discussions now, or even earlier. So there are different pots of money that buy different things for the military depending on where you are. But again, what drives me, if you remember, is we work off of those validated requirements. So the services have come to us and have said, we need that Ebola vaccine. Now, does that equate to they will buy it at the time and place that it is available? And so we've got to assess, well, how much is it going to cost? You may look at our numbers and say, we're going to charge you $10,000 for that product. We may only be able to afford 100. So those are the types of challenges that we run into. Okay, so good on time, so thanks very much.